Let's talk about the importance of computer hardware in a system. And by computer hardware, I'm referring to workstations, servers, storage, and networks. Now, networks as part of our site survey we'll discuss later on. So let's talk about first servers and storage. Give me your perspective on what you hear from customers, maybe some of the questions that they ask you. Because the challenges we deal with are existing hardware versus the new requirement to support our new IP video system.
Sure. Probably the first question that comes out every time we do a meeting with a customer about a VMS system is, can we use the existing hardware that we have, whether that's server hardware, workstation hardware, or storage. Probably the two biggest things is the server hardware and the storage hardware. So let's cover that first, and then we'll go back and we'll talk a little bit more about workstations.
Makes sense.
So the server hardware is important to the system, and one thing that I'll say throughout this entire section is you have to have the ability to reference the data sheets, the tech notes, and the release notes that the manufacturer of the VMS provide.
Of the new IP system you're trying to deploy.
Right, the VMS
Correct.
data sheets and those other technical documentation things, the web resources that they provide, you have to use those resources, because if you don't have the right hardware, if you don't work in the right operating system environment, then the software won't work with your hardware. So if you plan on using that, or even if for security reasons, whatever operating system environment that you use, you really need to make sure that the manufacturer of the VMS works within that realm. If they don't, then of course that's going to probably be a dead end or a very quick change to a different product. So the first thing is that those tech notes and things like that to make sure that the hardware and the OS are in line.
That makes sense.
Secondly, with servers, one of the important things is it a physical environment or is it a virtual environment? By physical, I mean, are you buying and dedicating, or are you going to take an existing machine and dedicate it to the application, or to being the servers or the archivers or the NVRs or whatever type of service is being run on that machine? Are you dedicating a machine to that? That's being a physical type environment, or a virtual environment, meaning your operating systems all are in working together in that virtual environment where you're sharing resources, which is happening a lot more in today's world out there. So that's the thing. So in either case, in the physical environment, do you have the right OS? We talked about that a second ago. Are you working with Windows Storage Server or Windows Server 2008 R3, and then the VMS has to be able to operate in that environment? Or have you moved up to Windows Server 2012, and are you operating in that environment? So in either case, in the physical or the virtual world, or the OS is compatible. In the physical space, do you have enough CPU power and enough memory and enough network connectivity to work in the system? Will the VMS operate efficiently on that machine that you have? You need to make sure you reference, again, those tech notes, the release notes, and the data sheets to find out about those things. That's going to be the most important piece of that. That's your first look. One note there is, I would not recommend that you buy or that you use devices that have the minimum requirements, because what's going to happen to you as you expand the system or you make changes to the system, you're going to find that now your hardware is going to be a little bit short in terms of how it handles that, and you may run into an issue. So always shoot for the more you can afford, the better off you're going to be long term. And I think that's a good rule of thumb to live by.
As we say, minimum requirements equals minimum performance. So the system is going to perform poorly for you. It might perform, but not well.
And if you need to add on to the system, or you want to add on to the system, you're going to end up having to repurchase it, which would be a misuse of funds, or just not a good investment. In the virtual server environment, you need to understand what virtual environment you're working in. Is it VMware? Is it Marathon? Or is it one of those other environments in the Windows virtual environment? Is the system compatible with those environments? And if it is, again, beyond that, what level of virtual compatibility do you want? Do you want the immediate supervision? Do you want just, that it operates in that environment with no backup? How do you want that to operate, and how do you want that to function for you in terms of your system? Typically in the virtual environment, it's easier to move resources amongst virtual machines than it is with a physical environment. So if I need to add more CPU power or I need to add more memory, I can just move that from that virtual environment resource set where I needed to go in that virtual environment. With the physical, I would have to go out and purchase more or maybe even change the machine out.
And I know with Bosch, we do provide as an option servers. Of course, we are also Bosch is a very open camera platform, and we work with most of the main VMSs out there and are happy to partner. So either way, we can have that conversation and cover the customer.
That's a good point, though. Bosch, for example, is COTS, commercial off the shelf. Everybody always uses acronyms. Commercial off the shelf is COTS. Does the environment that you're going to work in, or does the VMS that you're looking at, will it require that you buy hardware from the manufacturer that supplies the VMS, or can you use off-the-shelf hardware? Can you use machines that you already have or that you like purchasing and take advantage of service plans or price discounts based on the hardware that you like to use on a daily basis?
And some IT managers have standardized on certain manufacturers.
Correct.
And let's finish up with workstations. And I think workstations, a little difference here is with a server, there's basically, it's a checkbox or not, kind of a 1 or a 0, that the server must work with our new IP system. Workstation, we have to ask the customer deeper questions about how they want to view their video. How are they going to use the system to manage it? And that is going to determine workstations. One piece of hardware I haven't heard you talk about is graphics card, but maybe you could expand upon that with workstation requirements, and can they use their existing workstation?
So one thing to keep in mind is not everybody knows what a server is. They don't know where it's located. It's kind of one of those devices that the professional services people, the IT people take care of. There's one server and there's many. Everybody has a workstation. So there's a couple of servers in systems depending upon the system, but everybody has a workstation sitting in front of them on their desk, at home. There's a laptop, so on and so forth. So the question is, can we use the existing things that we have? All too often the answer is no, but that doesn't necessarily apply every time. Realistically, the reusing or buying workstations is dependent on a couple of different things when it comes to IP video systems. First and foremost, how many cameras do you want to see on the monitor at one time? If you expect to see large volumes or large numbers of cameras on the machine, then you're going to need a
with high resolution.
Exactly, a really good machine. Second thing is the resolution. If I want a lot of cameras and they're all SD, I can probably pull that off without a problem using a good machine. If I switch to HD and I'm now going 1080p high resolution and I'm looking at 30 IPS videos, I'm going to be very limited to the number of cameras that I can actually view on the monitor associated with, or monitors associated with the workstation simultaneously. You really need to look again. Tech notes, data sheets, release notes, things like that. There are references out there for the manufacturers. They don't want you to expect more than what you're going to be able to get from that. So it's really important that you look at that stuff. Set an appropriate level of expectation for yourself. In the past, customers were used to seeing 16 or 25 pictures on the screen. Now with the kinds of encoding that's being used and with the resolutions that we're talking about in terms of the 1080p or the 5 megapixel or 12 megapixel, the 4K resolutions, even above that, you're looking at cameras now that are getting up into the 20, and you've even heard about cameras that are in the 40 megapixel range. So what do you need to play those back? Another important factor is the encoding. What encoding is being used? Is it an old camera or an old encoder that's using MPEG-4, or is it something new that's H.263? Is it something that's H.264, or is it even now you're starting to see product being released at H.265? The way the video is encoded is going to bear on the workstation in terms of how it's decoded or repainted onto the monitor. The newer encoding standards use different decoding standards, and those decoding standards are intense on hardware. In the past, in the H.264 world, we were using the CPU and the processor and memory of the computer to do the processing and repaint the video or decode the video on the monitor. In the new forms of encoding, which is in that H.265 world, everybody's trying to get there. That is completely different. That requires a much better and more specific graphics card because it's called GPU or graphics processor, graphics processing, and that requires a different type of piece of hardware. So you still need a really good computer that has a really good processor and lots of memory, but now you're looking at the need for having a very specific graphics card that's sometimes going to be just as expensive or more expensive than the actual computer that it's going in to be able to decode the video. And when we talk about that, then we go back and we look at that number of cameras that my expectation of looking at on the monitor, we're going to cut the number down even more depending upon the hardware. The encoding side is exceeding the decoding side, meaning we can encode it and we can get it there, but being able to decode it or repaint it on the monitor in an image is getting more and more intense, and the hardware is not being developed at the same pace that the software side of it is being developed. So it is very important that you pay attention to that. More than likely and more often than not, you cannot use existing hardware to do the decoding or to load the software on. Not always. Sometimes the IT department has made really good choices and future-proofed their systems, and you're able to do that. But more often than not, if your expectation is looking at a lot of video and you're going to be using a machine to do that, you really need to invest in a really good machine that's absolutely appropriate for the kind of video that you're going to be using and the application for it. If you're only wanting to play one video back that's being recorded, one video or two videos at a time, your everyday machine will probably work fine. If you're looking at trying to display 4 or 9 or 16 videos, you're going to have to go out and invest in a good machine with the right kind of graphics card and the right CPU processor for the machine itself.
I'm glad you touched on those points because we have a lot of customers now that are starting to ask about H.265. There are cameras out there that are ready to be deployed as it, but again, managing customer expectations, they have to be aware of what the requirements are, and we as security professionals have to be prepared to answer those questions. Luckily, and you have covered a lot here, this is a lot of great information. Luckily, Chesapeake and Mid-Atlantic Marketing has a document, the site survey document, that spells out all these questions to ask customers. The things like how you're going to use your workstation, how many cameras do you want to view. So those considerations are covered, and we don't have to memorize all this information on hand because that document is a great resource.
And if you're working in a group like most people are going to do because they're going to make a big investment, and this is a pretty big investment they want to make for a long period of time, it covers everything. It gives you an end-to-end so you don't forget something that's important and then have to go back later and bring it up and say, oh, we forgot about this, or nobody told us about that. So it's a great resource to give you an end-to-end look at what you're going to be faced with.
And the good news is once somebody has that information and has those questions answered, they can reach out to our team, our resources, and we can put together a system design for them, whether it is a Bosch VMS or a third-party VMS whom we partner with very well to provide the right system to meet those customers' expectations.
Absolutely.
Well, I appreciate the conversation.
Thanks.
Thank you.